Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everyone joining. We'll give this just a few minutes to let people log in. All right, for those that are on, if you don't mind, could you drop in the chat where you're logging in from, just so I can see all who we have represented today? It's Florida, Seattle. Wow, what a spread. Okay. LA, Toronto, Iowa, Berkeley, the big city, Houston, Texas in the building. Very nice. VA. That's my personal favorite, Virginia, right there. We'll get into that a little bit later. All right, let's see where we're at. 6:02. We'll just give it a little bit more time, and then we'll be in action. In the spirit of fairness, I am reporting live from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it's getting cold up here, so we'll be breaking out my jacket shortly. 85. Wow. All right. I think this is fine. We'll kick it off, and others that will join will join. This is you all's time, so I want to make sure you all get to ask as many questions as possible. Well, thank you all for joining. My name is Domenick Bailey. I am so glad to be here with you all. So glad to be a coach on Leland. Just a little bit of background from me. I'm originally from Woodbridge, Virginia, by way of San Antonio, Texas. Growing up, my dad was in the Army, so we bounced around a bunch, 10 different places, everywhere from Texas to Kansas, Germany, North Carolina, Honolulu, Hawaii, and then back to Virginia. So there's been a bunch of moves that have taken me all over. But I went to undergrad at the University of Virginia, where I was a psychology and sociology double major. While at UVA during my third year, well, right after my third year, my junior year, I applied to Harvard Law School via the Junior Deferral Program. That's a program that, when accepted, you commit to deferring your admission for up to a minimum of 2 years. So I deferred my admission for 2 years, during which time I was a judicial intern for a little bit. I was a paralegal at a large law firm. I worked for my hometown member of Congress in DC on Capitol Hill. And then I participated in the SEO Law Fellowship, which is a pre-law school fellowship that gives underrepresented students, law students, an opportunity to explore what it's like to work in a large law firm. So throughout all of that, I have always been super passionate about coaching, from my time in undergrad, working with the Undergraduate Black Law Student Association, co-chairing our professional development committee, all the way until now. And just, in my time post acceptance to Harvard, coaching so many students. There on the screen, you'll see a review from one of my longest term clients, Lydia, who I met while at UVA and who I've been helping her through the process of both gearing up for law school admissions, and now she's at the point where she'll be applying shortly. And she's, experienced a great deal of success, and she's someone that I'm super proud of, from her acceptance into Yale Law School's Launchpad Scholars Program to a super competitive legal internship at a prestigious firm in DC, DLA Piper. So that's just a little bit about me. To find out more, feel free to scan the barcode there. But as I said earlier, this time is truly you all's time. So let me turn it over to now this question and answer session. So with this session, feel free to raise your hand and I will call on you all as you appear in my queue from what I can see here. If for some reason you're in a position where you can't speak or come off of mute, feel free to drop your question in the chat and I'll get to those. But I will prioritize the live questions, but just ensure that we kind of spread the wealth so that everyone can attempt to get their questions answered. So with that, I will open it up to you all. All right. And Alexis, to answer your question, you can drop your questions directly in the chat or you can raise your hand. With that being said, Ashley Chang.
Hi, Dominic. Thank you so much for doing all of this for us. I feel like this is very informational. I do have a question about in terms of like writing personal statements and like essays specific to law schools. Do you have like any advice on like kind of where to start off, or like if there's anything specific that we should look out for?
That's a great question, Ashley. I would say it's best, in my opinion, to take a holistic approach to your application. I like to encourage clients to think about all of the compelling stories that they want to tell and that they want to communicate to a law school admissions committee. Maybe perhaps things about your background, where you grew up, your most proud accomplishment, either in undergrad or in your professional career, and kind of lay all of that out. And then think about the puzzle pieces that are your law school application through your personal statement, your optional statement, your resume, your letters of recommendation, and plan very strategically about what stories do you want to address through each of those media. And so with your personal statement, I mean, this is the opportunity for you to introduce yourself to a law school admissions committee and really kind of add character and bring yourself to life outside of the stats that they'll see by way of GPA and LSAT and the resume that they'll read. So I'll answer your question by saying think about what perhaps you would consider to be your most compelling story, the story that's most central to you, and definitely flesh that out in a way that's compelling, in a way that engages the reader, because at the end of the day, it will be a person that's reading your application. It'll be somebody that on a Tuesday in September picks up a stack of applications and begins reading them. And you'll want to engage them, and so that they'll say, let me make sure I set Ashley's application in this review later pile and not in this other pile. So I'm sure I'll touch on more of that throughout the rest of the session, but I'll move on to Siona.
Hi, Dominic. Thanks for taking my question and hosting this session. I have kind of a follow-up question to the previous question that was asked. But aside from the things that HLS mentions on their website in terms of what they want to see in the written statements, what are some specific things that most applicants to HLS don't really include in their application, and what the HLS committee would want to see?
That's a great question. I'll disclaim that I'm not officially a part of the Harvard Law admissions committee. So from that standpoint, I can't necessarily speak to certain things that they would officially want to see, but more generally, to talk about Harvard Law specifically, and I think this is something that, while specific, is not actually very specific to Harvard Law. This is the same for many different law schools. There's really no one way to gain acceptance to Harvard Law School. There's no one achievement or one credential that they're looking at to make sure that you have. And that's in part what makes this place special, and that's in part what makes so many other law schools special, is that every applicant and every person that's eventually admitted and accepted and chooses to enroll at a given school is bringing their own personal story to the school. They're bringing their own diverse perspective. So not that this is kind of what you're getting at perhaps, but I would say I would just really encourage you and everyone else to think about how can I tell my specific personal story and think about the things that set me apart as a candidate, because we all have those things. We all have those diverse and unique experiences. And at the end of the day, that's what law schools are most looking to do in terms of crafting a class to where I sit beside someone on my left that's very different from me, and that I'm sure their application looked completely different than how mine did, and the same thing for this person on my right. So thank you. I'll move on to Derek.
Yes, sir. I hope all is well. So my question to you is, can you tell me three things that you wish you knew going into the law school process?
That's a really great question. Three things that I wish I knew. I think also approaching this from the standpoint of things that I make sure that my clients know. Um, Storytelling is so important. It's so important because, as I mentioned, these are real, live human beings that will be picking up your application and reading them. So you want to be sure to engage the person that's reading your application. You know, when you think about your personal statement, you think about how can you bring yourself to life rather than how can you perhaps recount your resume, because they already have your resume and they already have, in a lot of senses, so much information about you. So the storytelling aspect is of crucial importance. I will say on kind of the same side, or maybe you'd call it the other side of this coin, is being prepared to talk about yourself. I think kind of for most people, talking about yourself and, you know, by extension, even selling yourself in terms of advertising why you make a good fit for any particular law school or program, that may not come naturally. So it's important to think critically through the questions that you're going to be asked, especially should you get to an interview phase, and be prepared to talk about yourself. It's not something that you can kind of roll out of bed and think, well, you know, no one knows me as well as I can. I'll be ready to, you know, recall these stories or facts or think about why I want to go to law school on the spot. So it's of utmost importance to prepare for those things ahead of time. Two other things that I'll quickly touch on is really the nature of law school admissions and how time sensitive it is. That's in part why I aim to be as responsive as possible to clients, because law school admissions is a time sensitive endeavor. By nature of rolling admissions, admissions committees in schools, they have the most available seats to extend to students at the beginning of the law school application process. And as time goes by and they extend offers of acceptance and people accept those offers, seats are dwindling. So it's important to get your application in as soon as possible. You don't want to rush it, but you do want to make sure that when it's ready to go, you're submitting. And then the third thing I would say is just really the power of connecting with people. I was someone who, and I still do this, I reach out to people of alums, or granted, I'm now enrolled at school, but even on a professional sense, if someone's doing something that I'm interested in, if they're at the school that I want to go to, you know, I might reach out to them and say, hey, do you have 15 minutes to talk? And that's something that those connections can essentially help you speak better and answer the, so why do you want to go to X law school? What makes the school special to you type of questions, and you can gain better insight. So I would say those three things. Great question there. Moving right along, I'm going to go to Empri, and then after Empri, I'm going to scan through the chat and see what we have there.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic. Appreciate you. My question is more about the LSAT. I was wondering if you have any tips just relating to prepare for it. Also, just as far as being in law school, like how to get the best experience out of it.
Two great questions. So the LSAT is a challenging test. I'm sure I don't have to tell or remind anyone on this call about that. So I think the biggest tip with the LSAT is not what program you're doing. It's not what class you're taking. It, in my opinion, comes down to discipline and consistency. And I think, unfortunately, perhaps people are not as disciplined or consistent with their LSAT studying as they might lead themselves to believe. So, you know, regardless of what program you're doing, regardless of what class you're taking, and regardless of your self-studying, I self-study for the LSAT. It's about making sure you're getting the hours in. It's about making sure that you are understanding why you're getting specific questions wrong and not just chalking it up to, oh, well, I actually understood that. I'll make sure I get that next time. So reasoning through why I got questions wrong was something that was particularly helpful for me. And just in terms of resources, I like I mentioned, I self-studied for the LSAT. I used a book called Mike Kim's LSAT Trainer. I found that very helpful. I used Khan Academy, which is free. I found that super helpful. And then I took practice tests, of course. So practice tests, you have to take those. Practice tests don't lie. You know, if you're scoring at a certain rate on your practice test, you can you can be sure that you'll score at around that same range come test date. So I wouldn't necessarily think that you're going to overperform on test day. In fact, I would aim to be in a position to where your practice test score, if you subtract about 3 to 5 points, you'll be fine with that score because that tends to be kind of what happens come test day. And that's due to a variety of different factors, everything from test anxiety to just questions being different and presented in a different way. So if you're in a range of 3 to 5 points of where you would want to be, I think that's ultimately a very kind of advantageous place to be in. So with that being said, let me scan through the chat. We have many, many questions. I'll take Kayla's question. So Kayla's question is, how did you know you wanted to go into law so young? What did you put for what are your plans for your deferral without yet knowing concrete plans post-grad? So this is a good question and allows me to talk about deferral programs. So deferral programs are great opportunities if you know, or kind of to Kayla's point in question, suspect you might know that you want to go to law school. Deferral programs are usually programs where you commit to a law school, but in your committing to that law school, you're committing to also deferring your admission for what's usually a minimum of 2 years, though you can extend for more years. For example, here at Harvard, I did the Junior Deferral Program. I did just the minimum 2 years and I enrolled. I have a friend who was admitted through the Junior Deferral Program in 2018, and he has had quite a career, including other graduate school experience between then and now enrolling. So the two main deferral programs that exist right now are at Harvard, the Junior Deferral Program, and at Columbia, the Leadership Experience and Development Program, I believe that is what it stands for. So Harvard is specific to juniors, while at Columbia, juniors and seniors can apply to it. And kind of to Kayla, your question about how did I know I wanted to go to law school so young? Growing up for me, I think a lot about in my household. I always joke that you could expect one of two things to be on the TV, which was either NBA basketball or the news. And my dad is the kind of dad that he just sits at home and he watches the news all day. So I grew up kind of around the politics and public policy discussions of things, the happenings of the world, and then moving to Northern Virginia right outside of DC, that became even more prevalent. So, fast forward a few different experiences at UVA, especially doing research in the School of Public Policy, and I began to see the importance of the law. So once I learned about these programs, I thought to myself, I think I might want to apply to these programs, but I also applied to law school, but I also knew that I wanted to take time off. And I also knew that, from all of the conversations that I had with people about law school, the general refrain was either I took time off or I wished I took time off. And in terms of benefits of gap years, that kind of comes up because, I mean, taking time off, it gives you a chance to one, decompress from, uh, you know, 15 plus years of school straight. It allows you to gain greater perspective on what are the things that you might want to do with this very versatile, but also very expensive degree that you're going to get, and allow you to get some real world work experience, develop work ethic, professionalism, be in a 9 to 5 culture. And these are things that really benefit you in law school. So in terms of thinking about what you want to do for all of these programs, both at Columbia and at Harvard, essentially what they want to see is that you've thought about how you might spend your years doing something meaningful and doing something substantive. They understand that what you say in the interview may not be what you actually end up doing, but the important part is to show your thought process and that you've thought through it. Moving back to live questions. Danish, and apologies if I mispronounced your name.
Yeah, no worries. It's Donish, but thank you very much for the time. I really appreciate it. Mine's sort of a more general question about kind of the law school application process. I know like depending on the school list, there's a lot of different things that might come up in terms of like rec letters and personal statements that come at different times. I was just wondering, how do you sort of advise clients in terms of the bigger picture and being able to like make sure they're hitting all of their deadlines, especially with a rolling application that is can be pretty stressful?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think at the crux of it, of doing that and achieving that goal, is organization. I think at the onset, it's helpful to think about what are all the schools that you want to apply to, what are their deadlines, and what are their respective application components. And I like to have that, in a nice central document of some type, so where you don't have to, be in your head thinking, okay, UVA's deadline is at this time, and but Harvard's deadline is over here, but UVA wants the YUVA essay, but Michigan, you don't have to submit that. Instead of having all of those things floating around, having those in a centralized location so that you can plan accordingly. And of course, many of these requirements and application components overlap with one another, from personal statement, resume, letters of recommendation. Granted, you'll want to make sure that you're tailoring and customizing those documents to perhaps include specific school information, especially if these schools are asking for a why this school type of essay. And you'll always want to make sure you have attention to detail and make sure you're not submitting to Harvard an essay about why you really want to go to Yale. Great. So Caroline.
Hi, thank you so much for giving this presentation. I really appreciate it. I had a question about the resume. I'm just a little confused on what should I put, what should I not, having so many things within my undergrad career. And should it be 1 page? Should it be 2?
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think a good rule of thumb is, well, 2 good rules of thumb are: look at the requirements and the qualifications for each school that you're asking for. If they allow more than 1 page, then that is an option. If they don't allow more than 1 page, you'll absolutely want to make sure that you keep it to only 1 page. But my general rule of thumb is keep it to 1 page. Usually, outside of very exigent circumstances, 1 page is more than enough to communicate to a law school admissions committee what you need to communicate to them by way of, your work experience, your extracurriculars, and who you are as a professional or a student. I think it's about, in terms of making those decisions, thinking about what are the things that matter most to you? What are the things that speak most to who you are as both a candidate and who you will be as a law student? And generally, thinking about your depth of experience rather than your breadth of experience. I'm sure many people can relate to this, but in undergrad, you might be in so many different clubs only at the member level. So rather than listing out 7 to 10 different member level type of engagements, maybe just list a 3 to 4 or 2 to 3 where you have progressed in that same organization year over year, maybe getting to a leadership role, or just things that exemplify your ability to kind of stay grounded, and those will also end up being the things that you can speak most passionately about in an interview.
Thank
Kayla,
you so much.
oh, of course, great. Kayla, I like your, oh, Kayla, you have a good question again about letters of recommendation, but I'm going to keep moving just because I already answered one of yours. Let's see. Video file. I will take this question from Daniela. How many iterations of my own personal statement did I create? This is a very good question, and one where I do not recommend doing what I did. So, well, I wrote my personal statement, and I wrote one that I very much so liked and thought was compelling and spoke well to a specific story of mine that I wanted to tell. And that story at a high level was just my passion for educational equity. But I remember the night before hitting submit, I was reading it and something just clicked to me and said, this it wasn't it didn't tell fully the story of myself in the way that I wanted to tell it. So that night I rewrote it, and granted I felt nervous just about the fact of rewriting my personal statement the night before submitting it, but I felt so reassured and I felt so much more confident with the personal statement that I then wrote, thinking this one tells my story better. And it would seem that Harvard Law School thought the same. Um, let's see. All right, we have time for a few quick questions. Let's see, what else do we have? I'm gonna kind of go rapid fire. Did I apply to Columbia Lead program? I did not apply to the Columbia's program. How did you know you wanted to do the JDP? I touched on that a bit earlier. If it's of interest, I'm going to post my information afterwards, but including on LinkedIn. I have a very extensive article about my decision to take time off and do the JDP program. Um, and that you can find that on Harvard's website as well. Balancing law studies with a social life. That's a great question. So life as 1L at Harvard, it's, very challenging, it's very rigorous, but it's very rewarding. I think it's about, at the end of the day, priorities and prioritizing what matters most to you. I know that I'm here at law school to do the best that I can as a student, but I'm also here to connect with my classmates. Kind of going back to a question earlier about different application requirements and components, and any, specific thing that Harvard might look for, that really doesn't exist. And because of that, I find myself with the opportunity to connect with classmates that are very different from myself. And it would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't take those opportunities. Not to mention that these are some super fun and super interesting people as well. All right, let's see. I'm going to find one good question to wrap up with. From Min, if you get a letter of recommendation from one person, can you use the same ones for applying to different schools? That is absolutely the case. So LSAC, the LSAC Law School Admissions College, is a centralized hub where your recommenders can send in, and they will send in their letters of recommendation there. And then through LSAC, they will disperse to all of the respective law schools. Quick note on letters of recommendation. I advise what I call substance over signature. And what that essentially means is choose a recommender who can speak in great detail to you as a person, to you as a student, as a professional, and someone who is going to give you a glowing recommendation. That might seem obvious, but sometimes what happens is we try to get the most prestigious, high-ranking, high-profile person in our lives, that either that name professor, maybe the member of Congress that we interned for, maybe our mom's friend who's the CEO of X company, to write our letters of recommendation. But at the end of the day, the letters that is going to be the most compelling is the letter that can speak in the highest level of detail to who you are as a person and as a candidate. So for example, for me, during undergrad, I did research in our School of Public Policy with a professor for essentially all of my time at undergrad. And this is a very well-respected professor. Together, him and I did a lot of work across Virginia, including writing a book on policing and public safety. So for me, when it came time for my letters of recommendation, it was a no-brainer that I would ask him to write one for me. And not all recommenders do this, but he allowed me to read the recommendation before then submitting it to Harvard. And I was joking with him that I said, wow, you made me sound like Barack Obama. And while that was a joke, that is the kind of feeling that you want to have when your recommenders are submitting to you. And even if you don't get the opportunity to read the recommendation, you want to be sure that they're going to paint you in the best light, highlight your positive attributes, and generally help you make the case to all of these law schools as to why you would be a good fit for them. So with that, and with respect to everyone's time, I want to say thank you so much for joining me here. This has been a great session. You have my QR code here. I believe Amanda dropped some more information on how to connect with me in the chat, and I really look forward to connecting with all of you. You can connect with me on Leland, on LinkedIn, and we can be sure to think about how we can best put you in a position to get accepted to these law schools. I always like to finish with the story. I remember when I was at the end of my third year, after I had applied to the Junior Deferral Program, I was doing an internship at the Arlington County Public Defender's Office. And this was about the time when I knew acceptances were going to start coming out. And I walked in to work, worked a full day, and I walked out of work and feeling like, wow, I feel like I might have, I don't know, am I going to get accepted? Am I not? And I checked my phone, and right there was a voicemail from a 617. That's the Boston, Cambridge area code. And I listened to the voicemail, and it was perhaps one of the best feelings in my life about getting accepted. And I only bring that story up because I want all of you to be able to have that feeling. And I look forward to working and doing my part as much as I can to put you in that position as well. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing, but feel free to reach out to me, and I look forward to connecting with so many of you in the near future. Take care.